We're going to be reading a bunch of short stories, and we're going to be looking at different elements that authors will use to create their fiction and why it would be effective. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find themes in fiction. How a writer creates a kind of moral to the story or a truth about humanity in their works of fiction. So we're going to start by talking about narration, and we're going to talk about first-person narration. Okay? I'm going to give you definitions for each of these first-person narration terms that you can just write down. But then we're going to have a discussion for each one about what you think the general effect is of writing in this style. So you're going to try and pull from all of your fiction reading knowledge to help me understand why a writer would choose one style over another. I'll turn off the lights. It's hard to see with the lights on. Okay, so the first style of narration, like I said, we're going to be talking about first-person narration today. And just get this definition, even though I know you know what this is, but just get this definition written down for first-person narration. It is when a narrator relays events from his or her point of view using I or we. So the narrator is a character that has some sort of place in the story. And so they use I and we when they're talking about these different events. Is it too dark to write by? Can you use the light of your Chromebooks to write? Okay, I'm going to stay back here for the recording, but tell me, what is the effect of using I or we? Like, why would a writer choose to write their book this way? Ash? How does it make it more personal? Okay, excellent. So while you guys are listening to the discussion, in the column that says effect, you don't need to write down this example. You're going to be writing down what your classmates are saying. So because we get this first person point of view and we hear their direct emotions, it creates a more personal story, right? What else does it do to choose first person narration? Why not find someone choose that? Keegan? It makes you feel like more included in the story. Okay, yeah. Especially when it uses stuff like I don't know, it kind of feels like a friend. Yeah, because we get like inside somebody's head, it feels like we know them that much more. And I like this idea that they become kind of a friend to us. We really start rooting for them quite a lot. Richard?
I think
yes.
And like maybe not thinking necessarily legal, just thinking in that head, so give the kind of in-depth view.
Yes, absolutely. If you are wanting to write a very character-driven story, it really makes sense to put your story in first person because you get to see not just how their actions create a character arc, but also how their thoughts are changing over the course of the story. Ashton?
I was going to say first person, like the author's telling this story from like his point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like there's a clear point of view and perspective in the story, right? So it starts to get into whether or not we can fully trust this person too. Zach?
Especially works with fiction helps understand what's going on there. Because it's like kind of mystical power thing. You don't know your experience with the character. You become relate to their experience.
Yeah, a lot of books that are introducing like a new kind of world. So they're not realist fiction, they're like science fiction or fantasy or something like that. A lot of times they will use this first person style of narration because then you get to experience the world at the same time as that character does. You know, it's kind of like a surrogate person for you to walk through this world with. Kel?
And I feel like it makes the fictional you talk to someone else, they aren't like, oh, Jared, I love so it's worth it.
Yeah, it's almost like you like trust that the events really happen. I mean, even though it's fiction, like they didn't happen, but you almost trust that they really happened because you know that a person experienced it.
Yeah.
And that leads me back to Ashton's point too about the kind of bias in a first person narration. Write down, sometimes the first person can be unreliable, an unreliable narrator. Sometimes we really don't trust them. Like we're like, this person has some sort of agenda that they're trying to get out. They might be unreliable for lots of different reasons. They might be young, like they're little kids. They don't understand the events the way an adult would. They might be mentally disabled. I've read books from the perspective of somebody who's mentally disabled, and so their view of the world is maybe a little bit different than somebody else. Or they might be a villain or like have some sort of like secret reason to manipulate you, right? And you never quite know. But all narrators, if they're from a first person, all first person narrators are at least a little biased because they come from a perspective. And so even if you can fully trust that what they're saying to you actually happened, I mean, it didn't actually happen, but it's complicated, that it actually happened, you still can't trust that their view of things is like the best view we can have of those things, because it always is centered on this one perspective. Austin? Absolutely. Like, you know who you're supposed to be rooting for. You know who is driving the events of the story because it is the person whose perspective we get, you know? And we're going to talk about the difference between participant and observer. But even when that person is not the main character of what's going on, they're still become the main character of the story because their perspective is centralized. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So a first person participant is when the first person is when the narrator is the central character of the story. They're the main character, or like Austin called them, the protagonist. And I think a lot of the stuff we were discussing with first person narration in general applies here. Like, we know who to root for. We know that they're coming from a certain kind of perspective or bias. We get a kind of character arc. But why would it be important to the author to make sure that this is the main character in their story? How's that gonna make the story maybe a little bit different from somebody who wasn't the main character in the story? Yeah, so okay, good. So what we get is kind of like a hero's story then. Even if it's not about an actual physical hero like Achilles, it's still like we hear the perspective from somebody who we know is going to be extremely important to events, right? And that means that we don't necessarily get the perspectives of people who are not really important. That person's so focused on what's going on. Yeah, Jack?
I mean, I kind of feel like in stories, like the main character, of course, who develops the most. So the person who develops the most is the narrator. You'll be able to see that development.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when someone said that it is very much character driven when you have a first person story, it is especially character driven when it's the participant. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. That's true. And also when the narrator is not the main character, you kind of get to hear how other people would see these events. And you can think of it as a little bit more objective then. Like they're not as stuck in the events and they're not as like emotionally invested in the events. Keegan and then Peyton.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna say. Like the main character, I feel like it's like a side character is like I feel like more humble than a main character.
Yeah.
Because they don't get all the attention. So I feel like you would get more clear view of the main character and also of the other characters if you read it from like a side character perspective.
Yeah, I think that does happen.
Where like the main character, I feel like they'd be a lot more biased and like a lot less intellectual.
Yeah, I think so. They are going to think that the things they're doing are very important, you know? Yeah, Peyton.
They only know how much that.
Yes. So it's not just that they have a perspective and that they're going to try and get you to feel the way they feel, right? But it's also that they have kind of blinders on and you don't get to see outside those blinders either. Yeah. Okay, let's do the next one. Oh, so this example here, it's from a book called Jane Eyre. It says, I could not unlove him now merely because I found that he had ceased to notice me. Like, imagine that from an outside perspective. So this is your friend, Jane. And she's like, I know he doesn't notice me anymore, but I love him because I loved him once. And so I got to keep loving him. As a side character, when you kind of like hit her and just be like, snap out of it. Like, that is so toxic. Like, move on with your life and find a new boyfriend, you know? But because we're here stuck in Jane's point of view, we're feeling her emotional investment and she's explaining and justifying things to us. And we kind of go along with it. We're like, oh yeah, I get it. I get where you're coming from. Yeah, Ashton.
I feel like if with the first person, I think we would have more involvement in the story since the narrator is an active character.
Yeah, so with the first person style about like feeling like you're actually there with the participant, that's going to help a lot more, right? Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is the observer. This is the opposite. It's when a narrator is a minor character. So they're not directly involved in the action happening. They just kind of like stand to the side and tell us what's going on. Okay, I haven't read it, but I think The Book Thief is like this. Who's read that one? It's told from a point of view of like death, right?
Yeah.
And death is like a character and participates sometimes because people die, but like is mostly just watching things.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be a first person observer story then, a kind of pure one. Are there any others you can think of that are like this? Yeah.
There's a show that I watched. I know it's not a book. Every single episode on the mountain, and he's just kind of like, I don't really know.
Oh, what show is it?
It's called The Disaster Fund for Psychic.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
It's about a psychic.
Oh, that's excellent. And so the psychic is just like experiencing things like, going crazy out in front of him.
All of his friends are like cliche characters. Certain like of other shows. He's got a protagonist character who has like super power, which tries to protect them.
Got it.
And it's just kind of like his life is a disaster.
Is this an anime?
It is an
Okay, it sounds like it would be. Yeah, okay. And that's a good example. Yeah. So yeah, Ash? Yep. Yeah, so it's hers is about a serial killer. And it's his friend watching the serial killer like grow up, right? So the friend is interacting with the serial killer, but it's from this, it's the story about the serial killer. Okay. So we talked about a little bit on the edges of why it might be right to choose this, because like Keegan said, like maybe you get a less biased perspective or a more humble perspective, right? But why not just choose third person then? Like, why would somebody choose this? Bridger, you were saying?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, kind of use like the minimalism and like, the, like kind of thought process, like in the first person. But it also allows you to have like this wider scope to be able to see everything.
Yeah.
So it's almost like that perfect one that goes.
Absolutely, I love that. I love that a lot. Make sure you write down that idea of scope here. Ash? Oh, what do you mean by that?
Like you can see like from most everyone's perspective. And everyone's is different. So yeah, if you have all that
Okay, good. Because this person isn't so caught up in the drama of the story, and they're kind of standing on the outside as an objective observer. They have their own biases still, but they're still observing things. So it allows you then to make your own opinion about what's going on in the story. I think this is the kind of story that really lends itself to writing fan fiction a lot of times. Like when there's a story that has an observer and narrator, or a limited third person, but we'll talk about that later. Like everyone wants to know what's going inside those main characters' heads, and so they'll start to they will start to like write stuff about those main characters, right? I don't know if you guys read a lot of fan fiction, but there's a ton of Sherlock Holmes fan fiction. And I just realized Sherlock Holmes is probably one of the most famous examples of an observer narrator. It's not inside Sherlock's head, it's inside Watson's head. And we just have to see how Sherlock does things based on Watson's perspective. Yeah,
I think it's more of like a humble kind of perspective, because like when you're looking at first person, it's all about me, it's all about what I think of all the like crazy events happening, and then so when you kind of look at it and you're just observing, it kind of shows more humble experience, kind of showing like, oh, let's do what everyone else is doing, not just based on me.
Yeah, like maybe the things that main character is involved in really aren't that important, or maybe they were the wrong choices, and this observer can understand that. There's, oh yeah, Ashley.
I was gonna say, like, there'll be less bias in the story, but there'll also probably be less involvement, and she's not directly involved.
Yes, so there's a lot of things then that will be missing because this observer wasn't there. And so if they are genuinely observing, they're gonna have to base a lot on hearsay. They're gonna say, well, I wasn't there, but I heard that this is what happened at this event, you know, and that can be, that can like create its own kind of bias or untrustworthiness. Yeah, Austin.
From the outsider, I think there's a little wonder where like people from
Oh, good. I haven't read that. Is it like shifting narration? There's different narrators. Okay, so then when it's from this observer, it's like we get the we don't have the love that we get inside the main character's head. Like the main character can justify themselves, and the observer might be looking at them and say, "Well, that person's stupid." Yeah, that.
Moby Dick kind of
Yes.
seems like Ishmael's main character, and I realized like the middle of the book, really not, and really it's what's happening.
You're right. Yeah. It kind of sometimes it seems like we have to be inside the normal person's head with some of those stories. Captain Ahab and Moby Dick is like this egomaniac that just wants revenge against this whale that he thinks like destroyed his life, you know? And so to be inside his head, it would be an entirely different chaotic book. And so we get inside this kind of normal person's head to explain it in ways that we might maybe more understand. It feels like that with Sherlock Holmes too, a little bit. But Sherlock Holmes is like, I don't know, he's like a cokehead in the books. He's like smoking crack and solving mysteries, and he's like brilliant, and it would be weird to be inside his head. Okay, let's go to the next one. So stream of consciousness narration, it's this style of first person. It will be we, I, our, but it's not trying to create a story for us. Most of the first person that we read, it has a reader in mind. So it's like, here, I'm going to explain my thought processes in the most clear, functional way I can. But I don't know if my head is just a weird place, but I do not narrate my life when I am thinking about things. And instead, it's like a jumble of thoughts all at once, going crazy inside my mind, competing for attention. I'll be listening to a song and liking a lyric, and then suddenly I'm thinking about Thanksgiving 4 years ago. You know, it makes very little sense maybe to an outside observer what's going on inside each of our heads. And stream of consciousness tries to represent exactly what that thought process really does look like or sound like. There are, oh yeah. Yeah, and when you portray a person realistically, at least what's going on in our heads, they always seem a little unstable because the selves that we represent to the world are kind of rational and as normal as possible, you know, but inside that's not usually what's going on. You get
reading the book with the Willpower.
Yes, yeah.
That book is very dense because he's like writing to his friend, and his thoughts are all jumbled, and it's kind of like a journal. So like you get like a real view of him rather than being like, like the first person. I feel like he would try to keep it together more, but since he's like just like a journal, kind of like falls apart.
Yeah, it's like he sees it as maybe a safe space where he can actually represent himself.
Yeah.
Really, that book I stayed up one night, like it was right when it came out. I was probably a junior or senior, and I stayed up one night and read the whole thing. I loved that book. I loved it. Yeah, Megan. Oh, sorry, Maggie.
That kind of reminds me of Alice in Wonderland because I don't know why. Like when I thought of it, is like when she's asleep, but then in her dream, it's nonsense. But it's
Yes.
like it's just like.
That book isn't first person, but it's almost like a third person stream of consciousness because it is so absurd in a lot of places. Yeah, Bridget?
I was just gonna say, you kind of lose like a sense of like the plot,
Yes.
and it's more of just kind of like building a character. You know, like in the book, it's more kind of getting to know the character rather than building a plot and having a big like climax.
Yep.
where it's, like, really-
Especially in a book that stays with stream of consciousness the whole time. Those are tough to read. This one that we do in AP Lit, everyone ends up really liking it, but the reading process is very slow. I'm just going to read this out loud to you. This is an early section. We have very little. We don't really know what's going on at this section, and this is the first time this character has been represented in the narration. It says, it's because he stays out there right under the window, hammering and sawing on that box where she's got to see him, where every breath she draws is full of his knocking and sawing, where she can see him saying, see what a good one I am making for you. I told him to go somewhere else. I said, good God, do you want to see her in it? It's like when he was a little boy and she says, if she had some fertilizer, she would try to raise some flowers, and he taken the bread pan and brought it back from the barn full of dung.
This would take me forever to read.
It takes a long time, but it's supposed to kind of flow over you, and you only get what he's talking about later on, like 4 sections later, you start to understand what he said. And the reason is because when we're thinking out loud, like when you're thinking in your head, you're not like thinking like Keegan said this and then I said this. No, it's just like she said that and then she said that and then he said this, and it's kind of like you don't have to name objects because you know what you're thinking about. So you don't have to say that the box he's talking about here is a coffin, because he can just say, he's doing this thing to it, you know? So it's like direct representation of the mind. It can be hard to read, but like Bridger said, you don't get character as much as, I mean, it's the purest way to get character. Yeah.
I think it just shows that like objects have a lot of
Yes.
because of the way that they talk about it.
Yeah. And it kind of like captures how we as humans will turn objects into sickles, where we start to obsess about certain objects and think they carry so much more meaning than just the physical reality of that object. Maggie?
It's almost like a puzzle piece.
Yes.
So much detail to it, so much like meaning to it, and then it doesn't make sense. But then once put in, like it somehow all jumbles up together.
That's a beautiful analogy, and I'm going to steal it and pretend it's mine in the next class. That is so good. No, I'll tell you that. Yeah, I really like that, because once you put all the puzzle pieces together, it might make more sense, but just this little piece of thought on its own is completely abstract. Yeah, Ashley.
I would say the story would have more of like a unique writing style to it, since the thoughts are coming from the narrator's head.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot more jumbled up, but it'll have like a funny.
It is. It's very unique, and not many books are written in completely in this style, but sometimes you'll get sections. Nat, and then to Lydia. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just trying to represent his thoughts in the way that it's like voiceover narration or something. The film is structured backwards, and so you have to experience his thoughts as he experiences them. That's a really good example. Lydia?
I read a book where I really like I didn't fully understand the story and like where all of the parts fit in, and I was like all of the way finished with the book. I was so confused with like the last chapter.
It takes patience.
Yeah, it was such a new read. Very interesting.
Well,
I also wrote like first person with letters throughout the book.
Oh, that's our next thing. Awesome.
Yeah.
What book was this?
It's really loud and
Yes. Yeah. Jonathan Safran Foer will do that. That writer will do that in his writing. Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I was really like this, but it didn't mean it was the other. It kind of had some weird parts that kind of was true consciousness, and you didn't really understand what to do that person.
Yep, and you're stuck in this person's head, which was very unstable and very like untethered from reality, you know. And when you only get that perspective, it's very you can't see all of the parts until it's all put together. Yeah. Ashton?
Slaughterhouse 5 is a lot like a stream of consciousness.
Uh-huh.
Because like you're just following this character as he like, goes through time, and like he's in his head a lot.
Yeah.
And just thinking and just looking at the world through his perspective.
And in that one, so in the other, it's used for mystery, right? To obscure certain information. And in Slaughterhouse 5, a lot of times it's used for humor. Like we laugh at the way that his thoughts are so out of order.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 more comments, then we're gonna move on to Keegan and to Ashton.
I know the movie Born Identity is from a third person, but at the beginning he kind of had this whole like you can kind of like experience what he's going through like with him because we don't know who he is either, and like you kind of just experience that like during the
Yeah, and I would say the most stream of consciousness parts of Born Identity is when the driving scenes, and it's all like very quick first person editing styles. You like see his hand changing gears and his foot pressing on the thing, and it's like very hard to like see what's going on. Yeah, that's a good example.
So how would you write like someone's thought process while someone else in the book is talking?
Oh, a lot of times they will just relay it. Like someone will relay what they were saying. So they'll be like, and then, you know, in this one, and then Darrell said this, and this, but it'll still be in that same person's voice a lot of times. And so a lot of those books is very hard to distinguish when someone's talking and when someone isn't. Yeah. Okay, yeah, Maggie.
So, there's a movie called Enola Holmes, and it's like Sherlock Holmes and all that kind of stuff. But it's more like first person, but it kind of shows her thought process of how she sees things and how she like, because she like figures out things compared to like Sherlock, and it's more first person, but like it shows like kind of like she's like, oh wait, I have to do it like this, and it's like all crazy and like super clever, but then it's also like, whoa, it's like
You're like, I don't know that I could spend that much time inside his head because things are so complicated.
Yeah, you like kind of get to know her throughout the story. It's like starts off with like just her like, I don't know, but it just shows like what she's doing, and then you're like, wait, okay, I guess I have to get to know you. And then
Interesting. I like that. I haven't watched that yet. Okay, last one is epistolary. This is what Lydia was talking about when she was talking about letters. So if it is a full epistolary novel, then the narration is in the form of letters. And so the narration is first person, but it is directed towards a specific recipient. Yeah, Ash.
I think this can show you someone's thought process next to like the rational thought.
Yes.
So there are rational thoughts within our system.
Yeah, because they have somebody that they're writing for, and so they need to make sure that that person kind of see them in the light they want to be seen in. And so a lot of times they'll include a lot of justifications for the things they did. You know, this is why I am behaving in this way that you might think is irrational, but here is my rationality. Yeah, go ahead.
I also read a book called
Wait, the element of what?
Element of
Oh, element of P. I thought you said the element of peeing, and I was like, that sounds like a very strange book. Yes, element of P is in that narration style, and that book's fun because they start losing letters, right? And so they have to write all of their letters when, like, so they don't have the letter S anymore. It's like kind of absurd that way, and so they have to write all their letters back and forth to each other without the letter S. So it's fun. Yeah, Keegan.
So yeah, this goes with principle of part too.
Yep.
Because he is like directing it towards his, but like, and because he's doing that, he's hiding some stuff about himself. Like,
Yep.
and keeping some stuff confidential, like the name of his sister and like stuff like that.
Right, and some things that have happened to him, right? That they're hidden. Yeah, when you have this clear audience, you definitely know that there is a bias and motivation there. A lot of times, like romances will be written in epistolary as two people who are in love write back and forth to each other, and they build the relationship this way. There is also a very gossipy feeling to epistolary novels where everyone's like talking about everyone else. And so you don't just get information from the two characters writing back and forth, but you also get information about how they feel about the people in their lives. Okay, Ashton and Zach, and then we're gonna move on.
So I think this is a lot like the letters in the Bible, like Ephesians and whatnot.
Oh.
Where, like Paul is directing his letters to like a different people, like the Ephesians or the Romans or something.
Oh, interesting. And can you see the way that he is kind of like making sure that his audience hears what they need to hear then?
Yeah, exactly. He's focusing on like what they need to work on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And Zach, what were you gonna say about this? That was you, right? Or was it Kale? Oh, Kale. Were you gonna say something else about this story?
I read a book about, I guess, no, it was just like,
Oh.
the author was like a drunk and the child was like an artist.
Oh, so the child ghost was teaching him
And
things.
the ghost was like helping the author.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I was like, oh, you read that book, and then I finally realized.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Like emails, letters. Remember, snail mail. Mail. How do I say that to make it clear?
Well, I don't know, someone just said like the book theory, or like writing letters to each other, and I was like, oh.
Letters to each other. Okay, that's how I'll say it. Letters to each other.
I know, it's just like.
Okay, I am gonna read this story out loud. Story. And as I read, you're gonna be marking the page, just underlining sections or putting brackets around sections that you think have something interesting about the narration. And then at the end, I'm gonna have you identify the styles and how so. And I think I'll get through this in time. Oh, good. All right, so it's called Just Lather, that's all. Has anyone read this story before? He said nothing when he entered. I was passing the best of my razors back and forth on a straw. When I recognized him, I started to tremble, but he didn't notice. Hoping to conceal my emotion, I continued sharpening the razor. I tested it on the meat of my thumb, and then held it up to the light. At that moment, he took off the bullet-studded belts that his gun holster dangled from. He hung it up on a wall hook and placed his military cap over it. Then he turned to me, loosening the knot of his tie, and said, "It's hot as hell. Give me a shave." He sat in the chair. I estimated he had a 4-day beard. The 4 days taken up by the latest expedition in search of our troops. His face seemed reddened, burned by the sun. Carefully, I began to prepare the soap. I cut off a few slices, dropped them into the cup, mixed in a bit of warm water, and began to stir with the brush. Immediately, the foam began to rise. The other boys in the group should have this much beard too. I continued stirring the lather. But we did all right, we got the main ones. We brought back some dead, and we've got some others still alive, but pretty soon they'll all be dead. How many did you catch? I asked. 14. We had to go pretty deep into the woods to find them, but we'll get even. Not one of them comes out of this alive, not one. He leaned back on the chair when he saw me with the lather-covered brush in my hand. I still had to put the sheet on him. No doubt about it, I was upset. I took a sheet out of a drawer and knotted it around my customer's neck. He wouldn't stop talking. He probably thought I was in sympathy with his party. The town must have learned a lesson from what we did the other day, he said. Yes, I replied, securing the knot at the base of his dark, sweaty neck. That was a fine show, eh? Very good, I answered, turning back to the brush. The man closed his eyes with a gesture of fatigue and sat waiting for the cool caress of the soap. I had never had him so close to me. The day he ordered the whole town to file into the patio of the school to see the 4 rebels hanging there, I came face to face with him for an instant. but the sight of the mutilated bodies kept me from noticing the face of the man who had directed it all, the face I was now about to take into my hands. It was not an unpleasant face, certainly, and the beard, which had made him seem a bit older than he was, didn't suit him badly at all. His name was Torres, Captain Torres, a man of imagination, because who else would have thought of hanging the naked rebels and then holding target practice on certain parts of their bodies? I began to apply the first layer of soap. With his eyes closed, he continued. Without any effort, I could go straight to sleep, he said. There's plenty to do this afternoon. I stopped the lathering and asked with a feigned lack of interest. A firing squad? Something like that, but a little slower. I got on with the job of lathering his beard. My hands started trembling again. The man could not possibly realize it, and this was in my favor, but I would have preferred that he hadn't come. It was likely that many of our faction had seen him enter, and an enemy under one's roof imposes certain conditions. I'd be obliged to shave that beard like any other one, carefully, gently, like that of any customer, taking pains to see that no single pore emitted a drop of blood, being careful to see that the little tufts of hair did not lead the blade astray, seeing that his skin ended up clean, soft, and healthy, so that passing the back of my hand over it, I couldn't feel a hair. Yes, I was secretly a rebel, but I was also a conscientious barber, and proud of the preciseness of my profession. And this 4 days' growth of beard was a fitting challenge. I took the razor, opened up the two protective arms, exposed the blade, and began the job, from one of the sideburns downward. The razor responded beautifully. His beard was inflexible and hard, not too long, but thick. Bit by bit, the skin emerged. The razor rasped along, making its customary sound as fluffs of lather mixed with bits of hair gathering along the blade. I paused a moment to clean it, then took up the strop again to sharpen the razor, because I'm a barber who does things properly. The man, who had kept his eyes closed, opened them now, removed one of his hands from under the sheet, felt the spot on his face where the soap had been cleared off, and said, "Come to the school today at 6 o'clock. The same thing as the other day, I asked, horrified. It could be better, he replied. What do you plan to do? I don't know yet, but we'll amuse ourselves. Once more he leaned back and closed his eyes. I approached him with the razor poised. Do you plan to punch them all? I ventured timidly. All. The soap was drying on his face. I had to hurry. In the mirror, I looked toward the street. It was the same as ever. The grocery store with 2 or 3 customers in it. Then I glanced at the clock, 2:20 in the afternoon. The razor continued on its downward stroke. Now, from the other side, burned down, a thick blue beard. He should have let it grow like some poets or priests do. It would suit him well. A lot of people wouldn't recognize him. Much to his benefit, I thought, as I attempted to cover the neck area smoothly. There, for sure, the razor had to be handled masterfully, since the hair, although softer, grew into little swirls. Curly beard, one of the tiny pores could be opened up and issue forth its pearl of blood. A good barber, such as I, prides himself on never allowing this to happen to a client, and this was a first-class client. How many of us had he ordered shot? How many of us had he ordered mutilated? It was better not to think about it. Torres did not know that I was his enemy. He did not know it, nor did the rest. It was a secret shared by very few, precisely so that I could inform the revolutionaries of what Torres was doing in the town, and of what he was planning each time he undertook a rebel hunting excursion. So it was going to be very difficult to explain that I had him right in my hands and let him go peacefully, alive and shaved. The beard was now almost completely gone. He seemed younger, less burdened by years than when he had arrived. I suppose this always happens with men who visit barbershops. Under the stroke of my razor, Torres was being rejuvenated. Rejuvenated because I am a good barber, the best in the town, if I may say so. A little more lather here under his chin, on his Adam's apple, on his big vein. How hot it is getting. Torres must be sweating as much as I, but he's not afraid. He is a calm man who is not even thinking about what he is going to do with the prisoners this afternoon. On the other hand, I, with this razor in my hands, stroking and restroking this skin, trying to keep blood from oozing from these pores, can't even think clearly. Damn him for coming because I'm a revolutionary and not a murderer. And how easy it would be to kill him. And he deserves it. Does he? No. What the devil? No one deserves to have someone else making the sacrifice of becoming a murderer. What do you gain by it? Nothing. Others come along and still others, and the first ones kill the second ones, and the next ones, and it goes on like this until everything is a sea of blood. I could cut his throat just so, zip, zip. I wouldn't give him time to complain. And since he had his eyes closed, you wouldn't see the glistening knife blade or my glistening eyes. But I'm trembling like a real murderer. Out of his neck, a gush of blood would spout onto the sheet, on the chair, on my hands, on the floor. I'd have to close the door, and the blood would keep inching along the floor, warm, eradicable, uncontainable, until it reached the street like a little scarlet stream. I'm sure that one solid stroke, one deep incision would prevent any pain. It wouldn't suffer. But what would I do with the body? Where would I hide it? I'd have to flee, leaving all I have behind, and take refuge far away, far, far away. But they would follow until they found me. Captain Torres's murderer. He slit his throat while he was shaving him, a coward. And then on the other side, the avenger of us all, a name to remember. And here they would mention my name. He was the town barber. No one knew he was defending our cause. And what of all this? Murderer or hero? My destiny depends on the edge of this blade. I can turn my hand a bit more, press a little harder on the razor and sink it in. The skin would give way like silk, like rubber, like the straw. There's nothing more tender than human skin, and the blood is always there, ready to pour forth. A blade like this doesn't fail. It's my best. But I don't want to be a murderer. No, sir. You came to me for a shave, and I perform my work honorably. I don't want blood on my hands. Just lather, that's all. You are an executioner, and I am only a barber. Each person has his own place in the scheme of things. That's right, his own place. Now his chin had been stroked clean and smooth. The man sat up and looked into the mirror. He rubbed his hands over his skin and felt it fresh, like new. Thanks, he said. He went to the hanger for his belt, pistol, and cap. I must have been very pale. My shirt felt soaked. Torres finished adjusting the buckle, straightened his pistol in the holster, and after automatically smoothing down his hair, he put on the cap. From his pants pocket, he took out several coins to pay me for my services. And he began to head toward the door. In the doorway, he paused for a moment, and turning to me, he said, "They told me that you'd kill me. I came to find out. But killing isn't easy. You can take my word for it." And he headed on down the street. What a quest. Yeah. Okay. Here's what I want you to do now with the kind of moments that you marked. Ignore those two little marks in the side. I pulled this from another teacher's website and they were doing something else with it. I meant to erase them. Okay, so I'm going to kind of give you these guided annotations to do for this. You're going to answer the questions that I'm going to give you, but you're going to answer them to the sides of the passage where you find the evidence. Let me find my questions. I am so disorganized this year. Okay, number one is just you are going to name the style of narration. And you're going to find where you find evidence for the style of narration. So maybe at the very beginning, maybe towards the end, what have you. And you're going to put a little 1 to the side of where you find it. And then you're going to name the style of narration. So instead of answering all of these just in a row on a piece of paper, you're answering these questions in the margins of your story. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So that's number one, what style is it? But then number 2 is how does the style change? So it might be more than one style. So how does the narration change throughout the story? And you could answer number 2 then in a couple different places if you want to. Number 3 is why would the author choose this style? Just like we were talking about with all the different styles, but here more specific because now you have a story with it. And what does the style reveal about the character and his state of mind? So about the main character, the protagonist, and his state of mind. Okay, you can do this by yourself if you'd like to, or you can do this with a partner if you'd like to, but everyone's going to turn in about 7 minutes or so their work in the margins. Make sense? Okay, go for it on your own or with a partner.